We spend an enormous amount of time in modern psychology dissecting the generations. We analyze the baby boomers and their grip on cultural and economic power. We study millennials and the root causes of their burnout and financial anxiety. We write endless papers on Generation Z, their relationship with the digital world and their underlying nihilism. But right there in the middle, sitting quietly while the rest of the world argues, is a generation that somehow completely escapes the microscope. They are the ones currently running the corporations, paying the mortgages and raising the teenagers. They are Generation X. Born roughly between 1965 and 1980, they've been slapped with labels like the slackers, the MTV generation, or the cynics. But if you actually look at the raw psychological data, a very different picture emerges. Gen X is arguably the most resilient, the most fiercely independent, and the most adaptable group of people on the planet right now. Why? Because their ultimate psychological superpower is invisibility. Today, we are going deep into the generational psyche. We are going to deconstruct the trauma of the Latchkey Kid, the true origin of their famous whatever attitude, the crushing weight they currently carry as the sandwich generation, and the unique neurological advantage of being the last true analog humans.
To truly understand the adult Gen X brain, you have to rewind the clock and look at their source code. You have to go back to the living rooms of the late 1970s and 1980s. During this time, Gen X became the subject of a massive accidental sociological experiment. They were the very first generation born into a world where divorce rates absolutely skyrocketed, actually doubling between the mid-60s and late 70s. Simultaneously, the two-income household became the new economic norm. The result of this shift was the phenomenon of the Latchkey Kid. This wasn't just a cute, catchy nickname. It was a stark daily reality for millions of children. Kids as young as 6 or 7 were given a house key on a shoelace, told to walk themselves home, let themselves in, lock the door, and wait for their parents to get off work. From a developmental psychology perspective, this is massive. In psychology, we talk a lot about attachment theory. Secure attachment develops when a child has consistent, reliable availability from their caregivers. But for Gen X, that caregiver was often physically absent during critical developmental hours. While millennials experienced helicopter parenting and Gen Z experienced snowplow parenting where all obstacles were cleared for them, Gen X was raised in a void of supervision. They had to figure out how to make a snack without burning the kitchen down and settle neighborhood disputes without an adult referee. Psychologists view this resulting hyper-independence not just as a life skill, but as a profound trauma response. It is a defense mechanism and a survival strategy. The internal locus of control is dialed up to the absolute maximum. The core subconscious belief becomes, I cannot rely on others to save me. I must save myself. This is exactly why, in the modern workplace, Gen X managers notoriously struggle with delegation. To them, trusting someone else to do the job feels inherently unsafe. If they don't touch it, it won't be done right. They aren't control freaks out of a desire for power. They're control freaks because during their formative years, nobody else was at the controls.
If you walk up to a boomer and ask how they are, they might say living the dream. A millennial might say, I'm completely overwhelmed. But if you ask a Gen Xer, you are highly likely to get a shrug and a single defining word, whatever. Now, people often mistake whatever for apathy or laziness, but psychologically, it is the exact opposite. They care, and they actually care deeply. Whatever is a psychological shield. It is a manifestation of defensive cynicism. To understand why, you have to look at the media diet they were force-fed during their formative years. They were the first generation to be bombarded by the relentless 24-hour news cycle and the aggressive rise of mass advertising. They sat in their classrooms and watched the Challenger space shuttle explode on live television. They watched the AIDS epidemic devastate communities while government institutions largely stayed silent. They learned a very hard, very cold lesson at a very young age. Institutions lie, Heroes fail, and the system is fundamentally broken. So, to protect themselves, they retreated into irony. This is the birthplace of Gen X's famously dark and sarcastic humor. Sarcasm is a highly effective psychological tool that allows you to engage with a painful, disappointing reality without being emotionally destroyed by it. If you can mock the corporate machine, you reclaim a sense of power over it. Because they were raised in a sea of fake plastic marketing, they value raw authenticity above all else. They can smell a sales pitch from a mile away. If you try to manipulate them with emotional storytelling or flashy influencer hype, you will hit a brick wall. They don't want to be inspired. They want the facts, they want the specs, and then they want you to leave them alone. They looked at the shiny, manufactured American dream of the boomers and collectively said, "Yeah, I'm not buying it." Demographically, Generation X is a much smaller cohort sandwiched between two massive population booms, with the boomers above them refusing to retire and holding on to political and corporate power, and the Millennials and Gen Z below them loudly demanding cultural change and constant attention. Gen X experiences a psychological phenomenon known as Invisibility Syndrome. They are entirely used to being overlooked. When the media talks about generational warfare, it's almost always boomers versus millennials. Gen X isn't even invited to the fight. But here is the psychological twist. They vastly prefer it that way. Being the forgotten generation has provided them with immense autonomy. While Gen Z is constantly scrutinized and canceled for digital footprints, and boomers are blamed for the state of the economy, Gen X operates in the shadows, completely unbothered. This lack of scrutiny gave them the quiet space to essentially build the modern world. Think about it. Who founded Google? Gen X. Amazon? Gen X. Tesla? Gen X. They didn't grow up with the extrinsic motivation of wanting to be famous influencers. They were driven by intrinsic motivation. They wanted to be competent. They value concrete results over public recognition. It's the garage band mentality. You don't play music to get famous. You play because you want to build something cool. If people like it, great. If not, whatever. But this hyper-independent, invisible generation is currently facing a massive psychological crisis. They are surviving what we can call the Great Squeeze. Gen X is the core of the sandwich generation. They are simultaneously pressed between two immense, heavy responsibilities. On one side, they have aging parents. Boomers are living longer than any previous generation, but they require significant care. Gen X is the one managing their doctors, their finances, and their assisted living facilities. On the other side, they have dependent children. Due to the current economic climate, Gen Z and Gen Alpha are staying in the nest much longer, often well into their mid to late 20s. Psychologically, this creates severe role strain and profound compassion fatigue. Gen X is functioning as the emotional and financial anchor for literally everyone around them. They are the responsible adults in every single room. But remember their foundational latchkey programming. They are hardwired to believe they must do everything themselves. So instead of asking for help, they internalize the immense pressure. They absorb the stress. This leads to an epidemic of high-functioning burnout. You won't see them having public meltdowns on social media. They still show up to work, they still cook dinner, and they still pay the bills. But internally, their allostatic load, the wear and tear on the body from chronic stress, is reaching a breaking point. Their cortisol levels are permanently elevated. They act as the shock absorbers of society, taking every bump so their parents can age with dignity and their kids can feel safe. But nobody is checking on the shock absorbers. The body inevitably keeps the score, which is exactly why we are seeing a spike in midlife health crises and stress-related illnesses in this specific demographic. You can only say, "I'm fine," for so long before your nervous system disagrees with you.
Despite this stress, Gen X possesses a very specific, highly valuable neurological advantage over every other generation alive today. They are digital immigrants.
Millennials and Gen Z are digital natives. They were born into the matrix. Boomers are digital tourists. They visit the digital world, but they don't really live there. Gen X built the bridge between the two. They spent their formative childhood years completely analog. Their brains developed learning how to read paper maps, how to navigate library catalogs, and how to have the patience to wait hours for a specific song to play on the radio just to record it onto a cassette tape. But they entered young adulthood and the workforce exactly as the digital revolution exploded. Psychologically, this dual upbringing grants them incredible cognitive flexibility. They can effortlessly speak both languages. They can sit in a boardroom and connect with a boomer boss who demands a formal face-to-face meeting, and an hour later, seamlessly manage a Gen Z intern who only communicates through Slack and emojis. They are the universal translators of the modern workforce. But most importantly, because their brains finished developing before the smartphone era, they treat technology fundamentally differently. For Gen Z, the phone is essentially an extension of the self. For Gen X, the phone is merely a tool, and tools can be put down. Gen X is the only generation that retains the muscle memory of true disconnection. They know that the world will not end if they don't respond to an email for 3 hours. They remember what deep work and deep uninterrupted rest actually felt like before the notification era took over our dopamine receptors. They know how to be alone in a room without feeling lonely, a skill that younger generations are now desperately going to therapy to try and learn. Generation X might be the middle child of history, quietly watching the world burn from a comfortable distance. But their resilience, their skepticism, and their unwavering independence have quietly held the fabric of our society together. If you are a Gen Xer, consider this your long overdue user manual. And if you aren't, maybe it's time to stop talking and start taking notes from the generation that knows how to survive anything. Let me know in the comments if you relate to this, or if you're just going to shrug and keep scrolling. Until next time, stay lucid.